Hello, everybody. Welcome to VRIC Media, your most trusted voice in metals and mining. My name is Jesse Day. Today is January 16th, 2026, and my guest is the founder and publisher of the Gold, Goats, and Guns blog and podcast, Tom Luongo. I am thrilled to be speaking with you once again.
Thank you, Jesse. It was good to get the invite from you again, as always. And it's just kind of a shame that Martin Armstrong couldn't join us today because that was originally our intention. So, but
Yes,
as
we
always,
will get we will get you and Martin for a part two on the channel once again at some point because your last panel did excellent. People loved it. Now, a lot going on in the world today. I want to start with the supposed strike on Iran that was going to take place. According to rumors circulating online, Trump was about to strike Iran, but was convinced not to do so at the last moment. I want to read a quote from the Times of Israel. Trump said to tell Iran he's not about to attack as U.S. returns troops to Qatar Air Base. Gulf states led efforts to convince Trump to, quote, give Iran a chance. Now, unpack the situation for us as you see it. We also saw Lindsey Graham being very dejected in the aftermath that there was not a strike on Iran. Do you think this is something that has cooled off? You mentioned before we hit record that you didn't think there was going to be a strike in the first place. Walk us through that. And could things escalate to the point where we do see a strike on Iran at some point in the future?
I I just don't think so, Jesse. Like the Trump has made this abundantly clear that look, if he does anything, it'll be very limited. It'll be very limited in target and scope, like he did last summer over Fort Al. What he did with Maduro over Venezuela. Like he brought half the U.S. Navy, parked it outside of Caracas, and went, "Your move," right? Meanwhile, getting all sorts of reconnaissance data and everything else, and shaking down ships and figuring out what's going on, and just doing a tremendous amount of SIGINT work in the region. I think the guys who've covered this really well in my orbit are guys like Blaine Holt and Ian Burlingame. They've been on multiple podcasts together, kind of going over the ins and outs of those things. So I would defer to those guys and their interpretation, the analysis of what happened in Venezuela. I mean, as far as Iran is concerned, it's obvious that Trump is no fan of the current political state of affairs in Iran any more than I think he was actually happy about the political state of affairs in Israel, which is why he let both of them beat the hell out of each other last year, right? Excuse me. But the big thing for him, and what is his guiding purpose, is to end this whole nuclear brinksmanship game that everybody's playing. Like, remember what I said last summer? Iran's nuclear weapon is the forever war. So Trump kind of took that off the table by unilaterally declaring their, the nuclear program's off the table. It's been obliterated, right? Whether that's true or not is irrelevant. What matters is that that's the practical outcome, that they're not going to pursue it any further, right? It doesn't matter that the facility makes, that we didn't bust the bunkers or we didn't do this. Right? None of that matters. This is about statecraft and long-term, reshaping of the world. And the people who profit most from the chaos in the region and all regions around the world are the old colonial powers of Europe. They're the ones who created all of these conflicts in the first place. So they're the ones that obviously they put these things in place for a reason. And what would that reason be? It would be to be able to continue to exploit very important commodities and the control and flow and pricing of those commodities around the world through their capital markets and through, their long-standing ancient relationships that they've built, via their old mercantilist trading empires, right? Be it the Anglo-Dutch, be it the British or the Dutch or the Spanish or anybody else. And so you have to think of it in those terms. That's really what all of this has been exposing. So what Trump is trying to do is to dismantle that with a minimum of bloodshed, right? And to avoid and thread the needle and avoid World War III. I think he has buy-in from Vladimir Putin on this in Russia. I think he's got buy-in from Xi Jinping over in China on this particular aspect of the story. Now, do those three agree on other things? Probably not, but that's irrelevant, right? At the end of the day, what matters is that Europe cannot continue to play these games if the other three powers are not on board with, helping them continue this game. Like if China has its own ambitions and the United States has its own ambitions, the Russians have their own ambitions, and none of them include the Europeans, well, then at the end of the day, eventually all of this will go away. So what I think is happening, that all this is a way of getting to the point where when you start to look at Iran, the traditional neocons in the United States, who I always map to British foreign policy, that's the Lindsey Grahams and all of them. They're very dejected this morning. They're very upset. John Bolton, I'm sure, is crying in his mustache and, doesn't know what to do with himself. And, Mike Pompeo, again, he even came out and literally shut the bed, for Christ's sake, with a tweet that was just, beyond the pale. They're all very sad about what's happened here because at the end of the day, Trump was never going to really do anything other than allow the protests to continue going on while there's certain segment of the protesters were there wiping out IRGC facilities all around the country. If you look at a lot of what happened and what are the places that were targeted, it was all IRGC stuff. I mean, axis of resistance stuff maps to European influence inside Iran. I was talking to Joaquin Flores the other day and from my podcast, which I haven't had a chance to put out yet. I'll probably get it out this weekend. So we're doing this on Friday the 16th. I'll try and get it out tomorrow before this one actually hits so that people can go and review that. But what Joaquin was saying about Iran is that, the theocracy on top is really a superstructure, right? It's like the board of directors, but there's all these technocratic verticals underneath and they all hate each other. No different than like the Windows division and the Office division not liking, and the Xbox division not liking each other in Microsoft under Steve Ballmer, who actively set them against each other and then destroyed the company. And so in some ways you have the same problem in Iran. You've got the IRGC, you've got the military, you've got the civilian government, and they're all different verticals with their own set of technocracies and bureaucracies that have to be respected and their own fiefdoms. And so, a lot of people, so at the end of the day, I think it's understandable that Iran operates that way, no more than the United States. If you're American, you can go through and you can look at all the verticals within the United States and know that the banking cartel is a vertical, and the political class is its vertical, and the military is its vertical, and you can see the same overlay. So why can't we treat Iran that way? Why can't we treat Russia that way? Why can't we treat any country that way? Certainly China works that way as well, if not more so than any other country that I just mentioned. So if Trump's policy is to allow these protests to go ahead and start knocking out the verticals that are supportive of the old European colonialist ant jar shaking chaos creation that they have been doing for the last 60 years, then as long as that is allowed to continue, Trump was never going to, fly F-16s or fly B-2s or anything else. But is he gonna shake a stick? Is he gonna, is he gonna do the Donald Trump thing? Of course he is, because he understands that he can use that as a means by which to, affect the outcome on the ground that he wants. At the same time, he gives Ayatollah Khamenei the opportunity to stand up and act as a nationalistic leader for Iran and for Iranians in some way. And then, you can thread the needle between regime change and holding on to as many of the institutions as possible. There may wind up being a regime change in Iran. I don't know whether it's going to happen or not. There's certainly an organic element to what's going on the ground. There's certainly a lot of people who are very, very finally getting to express themselves. There's also, but at the same time, there's also probably a third faction, which is, the classic kind of British MI6 operation going on to try and get control of things, install Reza Pahlavi, and have us, meet the new boss, same as the old boss thing. Trump clearly put the kibosh on that, the same way that he put the kibosh on Maria Machado in Venezuela. So you can see, if you look at the way he's handled Venezuela, look at the way he's trying to handle Iran, which is we get rid of the figurehead and we get rid of the infrastructure supporting the figurehead so that the people can then eventually choose new leadership while keeping in place as much of the existing institutional structure as possible, because that keeps a lid on domestic, from that perspective, domestic chaos. And and then people can move forward with a quote unquote minimum of bloodshed, and because that should be the goal, right? And then after that's all finished, then they can come in, and the best what Trump can do at that point is cut deals with all the foreign actors who have a stake in this, and that's why he brought all the oil companies in to Venezuela. Hey, let's cut a deal. Let's start figuring out a plan to rebuild the oil production in this country, and then China is going to get a piece of that oil. Venezuelans are going to get a piece of that oil, and America is going to get a piece of that oil because that's the way this works. Everybody has to get buy-in, right? No different than what he's done in Gaza, right? We're moving on to phase 2 of the Gaza plan. And I think the same thing is going to happen in Iran in the long run for everybody. And it'll be good for Iran. Whatever happens will be good for Iran, the Iranians, better for the Iranians. Let's not say good. Let's say better. Okay. Because at the end of the day, we can't, as long as it's better, and then let them figure it out how they're going to govern themselves going forward. Remember, this is Trump I really think Trump believes this stuff. I really do. And I know there's a lot of people out there who refuse to accept that because it's easier to just go, he works for Israel, he's a Zionist. Like, nonsense. If you take one look at Lindsey Graham as you invoked, he comes out of the meeting and he's like, I mean, it's almost like, someone told Lindsey he can't have any more, 10-year-old boys. Like that's how depressed he was. Like, sorry, like that's what we got here. And he's like, I've never seen Lindsey Graham that dejected. And, that's a good sign that Trump is completely in charge of the situation. The British / and or French, and the British and the French both are involved in Iran. FYI. They're extremely upset this morning, and that's having now spillover effects into what's happening with Greenland, how the Europeans are now starting to virtue signal around making nice with the Russians, who are completely like they don't believe a word coming out of the Europeans' mouth. Yada yada yada. So you can start to see how you put pressure here, and then you start to watch how it all starts to shake itself out after the point of maximum pressure has been applied, and then everybody starts to say, all right, everybody, I get it now. And so far so good on Iran. We'll see what happens.
Circa 2020, we pivoted the entire company, turned on its head, brought in new management, George B., our CEO, who's built gold mines all over the planet, and we focused in on CK, copper cake. It was not reliant on drill holes and discoveries. We can go through this process, engineering, permitting, get towards a development stage asset. US Gold Corp is a near-term, low-cost gold producer in Wyoming. To learn more, go to usgoldcorp.com.
Yeah, very interesting summary. And just to make a point about what you said about, you often do get attacked in the comments section when I interview you, but you also get a lot of people who support your ideas as well. My point is, I don't like Trump. I think he's evil. I think he's a psychopath. I feel that same way about Joe Biden. I feel the same way about George Bush Jr. and Sr., Barack Obama. People get the picture. I think the political class in general exists to enrich themselves at the expense of the citizens and consolidate their own power and wealth. However, even if people disagree with what you're saying, they should want to listen to you, because you should always want to question your own thesis and your own ideology and have it challenged. And every time I speak with you, I come away with a bit of a different, fresh perspective on the way that I see things because of some of the points that you make. So just to throw that out there, I think the information you're providing is very valuable.
I don't disagree that Trump's not some form of psychopath. Like I look, at the end of the day, to become president of the United States, they're not normal people.
Yes.
Right. Donald Trump has a set of skills and a life experience that none of us have. Okay. And our job is, at the end of the day, I'm not here to say yay or nay whether I would be friends with Donald Trump, want to have a beer with Donald Trump, think he's, I want my daughter to be around Donald Trump or anything along those lines. None of that. Okay. That's not what this is about. My job is to assess what he's done, what he's doing, and how he's going about doing what he says he wants to do. And he's been very clear about what he wants to do. Now, in the, I can put on my, standard libertarian, I distrust the state hat. No problem. It's easy. And by that metric, Donald Trump fails at every every turn. We can talk about putting a limit on credit card debt and, credit card interest, or price floors and price ceilings and this and that and everything else. And again, we can do that. That's fine. I'm not interested in that anymore. You want to know why? Because I understand that the world and the war that we're fighting is not a state war. We have non-state actors running around hiding behind the skirts of state actors and using them as the cover story for what's actually going on out there. And at a certain point, when that non-state actor infrastructure, which I would call the old, that's Davos, right? That's what I've been trying to call Davos for all these years. Once you understand how deep and pervasive that is at that level, and how those people are the ones who put the people in power that we're all supposed to then hate or love or this or have all these opinions about, well, they get to just continue doing what they do, which is traffic children, create slavery and misery for everybody around the world, traffic drugs and all and everything, and keep everybody on an economic kind of residual poison. If you're a fan of Dune, like you literally have to deal with these people on a daily basis in order to stay alive. They only give you so much air. They only give you so much profitability. They only allow you to make so much money, blah, 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 blah. The minute you make enough that you become successful, then they put their hooks into you and tell you that you work for us now, meet the new boss. And, I don't care if it's eyes wide, pick your metaphor, eyes wide shut, whatever. I don't care. Right. That's the world. At some point, when you think about how big that problem is, do you think that we, the people, really have the power to stop that? No, because they know exactly how to set we, the people, against each other. But at some point, every once in a while, you have a state-based actor turn right around and go, no, the real war is these non-state members. And I'm going to take care of it. And you hope that when he's finished, that we understand what's happened so well, and that's why I do what I do the way I do it, is that on the backside of this, then we can turn around and go, you know what? Thank you for a job well done. Now get out of here. We, the people, will take back over again. But for right now, no. Go thou forth and do the thing. Sometimes that's just what you got to do. Like sometimes you got to have Batman come in and do the thing. That Batman actually has to work with the government and support the institutions, because that's what society's built on. Like, we're not all hardcore individualists at the end of the day that, that can do. We're not. Most people aren't. And they're not for a variety of reasons. We can hope that we can build a society that fortifies them to want to be that way psychologically, emotionally, and everything else. But we're not there right now. We're all a bunch of Stockholm syndrome suffering, folks. And understand that at a certain level, every once in a while, use the Strauss and Howe model if you want. I don't care. I'm not a huge fan of it anymore the older I get, but it's not bad. The great champion has to emerge and start wiping the board clean. And that's what Donald Trump's doing. And, don't get lost in the little stuff. Oh, that's the wrong way of going about this or tariffs or that. No. He's resetting the game board so that when it's all said and done, markets can reemerge. I would argue, for example, that within this space, this sector of the commentariat, we would rewind the clock 5 years and be talking about Vladimir Putin. Everybody be like, "Oh, Putin's great. He's a freaking nationalist. He's brilliant. I love him. He's the best thing that Russia ever had." So why Putin? By the way, Putin. How did Putin really dig in on how Putin turned Russia around? Look all that different than what Trump's doing right exactly right now. It's exactly the same game plan. And so, you might have to, put your principles on hold for a few years in order to get stuff done. And every once in a while, you remind everybody what your principles are, what your limits are, and you say, that's fine. I'm not giving Trump a blank check on a lot of the things he does, but as long as he continues to do the things that are going to fortify the middle class in the United States, restart, people having babies and improving communities and ending the deracination and getting, and all of it, then we'll fix all the other stuff in post later on, which is exactly what Putin's doing in Russia right now. And it's exactly why the war in Ukraine, as promulgated by people like Macron, was so freaking evil, because Putin and Russia were on the verge of starting phase 2 of his long-held plan, which he wrote about. Like, Putin told everybody what he was going to do 20 years ago, right? And he was in the middle of phase 2. That's what Crimea was all about. And that's what moving into Syria was all about. And then and then these people said, nope, stop. And we have to stop it dead cold, turn Russia back into a war economy, which then slows down their development to becoming a quote unquote normal country. That was done on purpose. That's yet another Davosian or British extend and pretend operation. You want to call it Zionist, you want to call it the Rothschild, I don't give a shit. I don't care. That's your problem. That's between you and your therapist. I'm talking about the world as it exists. Okay? And that was the operation. And that operation needs to end. And Trump understands that, which is why he had Putin come to Alaska and carve up the world, as they, clearly had carved up the world at that meeting. Okay? And that's why he wants the war in Ukraine over, because he knows that he can't get the United States back to normality if he doesn't get Russia back to normality, and the two of them together then can be antipodes against China, such that and then let the Europeans decide whether they want to be, they want to be a part of that, or they want to go down with the ship. I don't care. And Trump doesn't care anymore. And that's very obvious. So if everybody listening to my voice right now views the world from that perspective, at least generously views the world from that, you don't have to agree with me, but you should at least look at the world that way and assess the man that way. So when he goes to Davos on Tuesday or Monday or Tuesday, whenever he's going to speak, watch it very carefully and watch it from that point of view. Read the national security strategy document carefully. Read the National Financial Services Oversight document very carefully, and you'll see exactly what I see. And the question is not whether or not he's trying to do it. The question is whether or not he will be able to do it. And that's two different things. And if you're arguing he won't be able to do it, well, that's fine. That's fair. But that's a different conversation than he's not trying to do it. And if you say because he's not going to be able to do it, that means he's not doing it, that's a logical fallacy. That's horseshit. That's blackpilling. And that means you need to go to therapy, because that's your problem. That's not his problem. Because that's when, if you are an American, that's when you step back and you say, yeah, I am going to support that. Even if he makes mistakes, even if it's unfair what's being done, that there's no arrests or this or all this extended pretend bullshit that our Congress is doing. Like when you have guys like Chip Roy come out this morning and say, if we continue to act the way we are, that the American people are just going to get fed up and fire all 435 members of the House and all 100 senators. And there's not a thing we can do about it, because they're going to get that upset about it. They're going to get that. There's nope, throw all the incumbents out. And if we clean up the voter rolls in the United States, and we clean up the electoral process for House members and senators, that's a very high outcome, very high probability outcome, come either this midterms or the 2028 election, right? So who benefits from that? Well, the American people clearly do. So who benefits from holding that old system in place? Well, the very same people that I've been talking about, who built that system in the first place. So
how does Greenland fit into all of this? Because Trump is saying it's for national security concerns that the United States needs to acquire Greenland. Obviously, we've seen both people in Greenland, politicians in Denmark, across the EU condemning it. The genius Macron, of course, saying that they could even send French troops. I don't know what that would do. But what is the purpose of Trump wanting to acquire Greenland? Because he seems quite adamant on it.
There's multiple things. The Don Rowe doctrine is not just a silly meme. It's the truth. While I was in the process of working on this month's Gold, Ghosts, and Guns newsletter, I'm writing about all of this, and I'm thinking about what this is. And you go back and you read a quick summary of James Monroe's foreign policy doctrine, and it's clearly aimed at removing all vestiges of European colonial power from North America and the Caribbean, right? As a means by which to secure American sovereignty. Well, the Donroe Doctrine is exactly the same thing. We have to add in now South America and Greenland and Canada. Greenland is important for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that it's the key to the maritime sea routes connecting Europe and Canada. If you look at the way the map is laying out, Trump is pretty much kicking Europe out of the Middle East. They've kicked the French out of the Sahel region of Africa and other places around the world. They can't take on Russia. They've lost they're losing in Ukraine, and now they're starting to they're now this week starting with we need to re-engage with the Russians. And, Frederick Murr's coming out and saying that, getting rid of our nuclear power plants was a mistake and all this stuff. All of a sudden, everything's changing. I wonder why. I can tell you why. It's because their bond markets are about to implode, but that's a different story for a different part of the podcast. But Greenland is incredibly important. So the only place left for Davos / Europe to get the natural resources they need to run the economy they say they want to run, which is in a post-NATO world, is Canada. So not only is Greenland the key to the Arctic in order to keep Russia and China from controlling the Arctic, it's also incredibly important for shutting off Europe. Because if you also look, and this is something I've been talking about for over a year now, the implications very early on in the Trump administration, look at the moves he made militarily, diplomatically, and economically in his first 3 months that he was in office last year. He fortified Giorgia Meloni in Italy, right? Politically. He also fortified her militarily by moving NATO assets out of Russia, out of Germany and Poland, and into Italy. He also refortified Greece. And then, of course, Viktor Orban in Hungary and the rest of the Visegráds by proxy. And then has effectively tried to, shore up the Balkans as well. Much, much harder task. And a much murkier task. But at the very least, stopping the British from turning the Balkans into a mid-90s mess again would be, that in of itself is a victory. But the key here is that the northern coast of the Mediterranean, the military powers of the northern coast of the Mediterranean are in Donald Trump's corner. So now you've got Russia, and as the key to the Eastern Arctic, and you've got Greenland as the gateway to the Western and to the access to the Atlantic Ocean. So how do you cut Europe off? You cut them off by acquiring Greenland. You cut them off from Canada. And so you're trying to isolate them geographically. It's why the Russians want Odessa, and they're going to be very patient about getting Odessa. They don't need to take Odessa by force. The Russians can wait another 10 years to get Odessa. If the European Union collapses as a political force, if it collapses as an economic force, then eventually, the people of Odessa will and Transnistria and all that whole region and Mykolaiv, they'll just leave Ukraine, and there won't be anything Ukraine can do about it. Especially if the United States is kind of the guarantor of of any peace that comes out of there, and it's a referendum and it's peaceful, and you can see how that would play. You can see how that would play itself out. And then the Black Sea becomes a Russian lake, as it should be. Erdogan and the Muslim Brotherhood are removed from the stage in Turkey, thereby removing British influence over Turkey. And Greece is the most heavily armed country in Europe by far on a per capita military asset basis. Ask yourself why that is. We've always understood that this is the problem. So that's why Greenland is important. There's about 16 or 17 other reasons, but that's the big one because it's Greenland first. While you took care of Venezuela, now Greenland has already opened up talks with Mexico. You've got Claudia Sheinbaum over in Mexico, literally saying, "I'd like to do X, Y, and Z, but I'm trapped by the cartels. Blink twice if you can't Claudia, if you can't speak freely, kind of thing. She's clearly captured at this point. And Mark Carney is running around as the Crown's emissary to try to cut deals with China to hand Canada over to China. And Donald Trump is not going to stand for that. I don't know if you've seen the things that I've seen about the people standing in line in Alberta to sign the referendum petition for independence. Like the numbers are off the charts. So Albertans are going to go to the polls for this. Danielle Smith, the premier of Alberta, is very good at talking out of all sides of her mouth. But the truth of the matter is she's going to do whatever the Albertan people want her to do. And if that's because she's a politician, she has to. So Canada is very important. So, but the key here really is that at the end of the day, Trump has to remove all vestiges of European property in North America. That means all the British offshore banking centers, Cuba, the French, for Christ's sake, they own islands in the St. Lawrence River. There's French territory still in the St. Lawrence River. Okay, no, not acceptable at all. Not certainly with mini Napoleon, over and no, unacceptable. This is unacceptable in every way. As an American, I get it. And I'm like, no, you people have been running a horrible operation on us. You've invaded us. You've invited the world. You've stolen all the friggin' post-World War II capital. You've stolen. No, absolutely not. You're all been paid. You're not getting any money left, any money back. And what's really happening, the way Europe is acting right now, is very much like a jilted ex-wife in the process of a divorce negotiation. They want alimony. And Trump's like, yeah, you're not getting alimony. That's just not happening. You're going to get nothing and you're going to like it. You've already gotten more than enough from us. So you better figure out what you're going to do. And this ties me back into the financial markets. I really do think that the financial markets are the things that are going to tell you everything you need to know. You got to watch that, plus what slop they put out in social media, what their little talking points are. So this is a big one. I was thinking about this the other day. Every week it seems like, oh, it's this week that the SCOTUS is going to overturn Trump's tariff policy. Every week that it doesn't happen, it's another week that the SCOTUS is just looking for some way to thread the needle so that they can say yes to it without looking like they said yes to it. Okay. Reason being that the longer these trade deals are in effect, the longer these tariffs are in effect, the harder it's going to be to unwind them. Kavanaugh has clearly said he understands that. So now it's just a matter of, if worse comes to worse, it's going to go 5-4 in his favor anyway. I think they would prefer to see a 6-3 or 7-2, even 7-2 decision on this. The administration is not worried. I watched Kevin Hassett this morning on Maria Bartiromo, and he just seen the smirk on his face when he was talking about, all of this. He's like, no, this is nonsense. So the poly market odds are all like, please, do you think that's a free market? Like, okay, we're doing this on options expiration, for Christ's sake. You think we have free markets anywhere? Really? Okay, that's nice. I'm glad you still like being told bedtime stories before you go to bed. I'm glad that you like, I'm glad that you're still 6 years old at heart. Everyone, like, sorry, the poly market's not real, folks. Okay, it's not a real market. It never has been. It's there as another means by which to create a social media frenzy and to write headlines at Bloomberg, CNBC, the Financial Times, the Times of London, blah, 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 blah. Nothing new. The New York Times, WAPO, all the rest of it. So tariffs aren't going anywhere. But here's the thing. What does all that do every week? How many people actually see the world the way I did that manage money? Very few. I mean, I talk to financial guys all the time. They're like, oh my God, I've never looked at the world that way. They just manage money, right? They just do their thing. Everybody, you can't assume that everybody has any, that just because they're managing $1 billion doesn't mean they have any geopolitical savvy. They manage $1 billion. That's a lot of work, and maybe they should. I would argue that they should, but that's me. And you could take my opinion, salt to taste, and then throw it over your shoulder or do whatever the hell you're going to do with it, right? That's the way the world works. So the thing is, you have to realize that these guys, they watch Jim Cramer, they read Bloomberg, they read the Wall Street Journal, they read the New York Times still, and the blah 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 blah. And so that freezes them in their thinking. Well, maybe, oh my God, well, what if the SCOTUS does reverse these tariffs? They're not thinking through the second, third, and fourth order effects. They don't have time for that. Maybe they should. I think the best ones probably already have, but there's a lot of them who haven't. There's a lot of them who are complacent. There's a lot of them who hate Donald Trump. A lot of them who have TDS. A lot of them who don't. Blah, 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 blah. Right? Got news for you. That story every week freezes probably tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars worth of capital, real capital every week. Like just sitting mispositioned in equity markets and bond markets and everything around the world. What do you think is going to happen the minute the SCOTUS upholds the tariffs? Oh, all those hundreds of billions of dollars and the trillions of dollars have to be repositioned. I've been thinking about this for a long time. You and I have been talking, Jesse, for what, a little over 3 years now? Something like that?
Yeah.
I've been on this thing for as long as I can remember, finally being convinced by Martin Armstrong that eventually the euro was going to fail. So I've been bearish on the euro for so long, I feel almost like Peter Schiff being bullish on gold, right? I've been looking for that catalyst. What's the catalyst? What's the thing that's going to finally drive money fully the hell out of Europe? Look at everything that's happening right now. I'm watching the euro right now, down below 116 to close this week. U.S. capital markets will be closed on Monday. It's options expiration today, so all sorts of money is being thrown all over the place to, try and save as many people as possible. Right? Fine. The point is that I keep watching bond spreads between the U.S. and Europe and inter-European bond spreads. I keep watching the way the Japanese yen is trading. I keep watching the way the Bank of Japan is operating. I keep watching all these things. And nothing I'm seeing is telling me that Donald Trump is losing. Gold is $4,600 an ounce. Silver's pushing up towards 90. Doesn't matter whether silver's over leveraged or it's not over leveraged. I chatted with Vince Lanci the other day, and he clearly thinks that, at some point silver's going to crest and then collapse. And he's probably right about that, because at some point, market fundamentals have to take over and whatnot. So, at some point, but all of these things have moved in that direction and in Trump's direction. The national balance sheet looks better. The trade deficit is down. GDP is up. Productivity is up. Capacity utilization is up. The labor market looks like it's turning around. Yeah, it's an economy in transition, but it's an economy in transition to good things, right? The big number, Peter St. just put out a great video, his daily video that I watched this morning about productivity being up, and a nice, simple discussion about the difference between GDP, which is gross national spending, and actual productivity, which is how you generate wealth, right? Trump's not spending money that way. He's putting real money on the table that he's getting from other sources and then building stuff with it. So when you put all that together, I think we're finally at that series of critical, you have to have like all the dry tinder, and then all you need is the catalyst. And what I'm going to offer up at this point is the SCOTUS finally getting rid of that last bit of uncertainty about how the United States can fund itself going into the future, which is that the president has emergency powers to treat economic policy as national security. And if that is defined by the SCOTUS in this way, Katie bar the door, that uncertainty is gone from the marketplace. And now we have to deal with it. And I'm sorry, but if you want my honest opinion, I could make the argument that the leadership in Europe already know this, and that's why they're starting to change their tune about all these things. And it's why they have to, say we need to end NATO if he's going to steal Greenland. And it's like literally could buy Greenlanders out for the amount of money that we pull in tariffs this week and move on with our lives. This is one of the things we have to make our peace with, whether we like it or not. When the United States starts acting in its own best interest and starts deploying its assets, and those assets are large, military, economic, statesman, I mean, all of it. If we start utilizing those things to defend America and not to defend Davos, it's a much different world than we're all used to living in. Much different. And that's where my head is right now. And so for those of you out there who don't like it, reports of our death have been greatly exaggerated, because you're watching what it looks like when the dominant power of the world decides enough is enough. And we have a guy in charge, like him or not, who understands that. And Trump's superpower is that he understands leverage, and he understands exactly to the dollar where everybody's pain point is. He's good at it. And that's why his skills, his unique set of skills, are the right set of skills, I think, for this moment in time, properly deployed. Now, if he's got the right people around him to shape his policy, right, that are tempering voices on his impetuosity and his volatility, or at least his public volatility, right, then I'd say we're in pretty good hands going forward. And that's a statement not just for the United States, but for humanity in general. Because if Trump is going to use the power of the United States to reconstruct not just the United States as a regional power, not a hyperpower, not a hegemonic power, but as a regional power that is willing to cut deals and make partnerships with all of its trade partners, not be a colonial extractionist. So make a partner out of Venezuela, rebuild, split the oil up. Let's build these people up. Same thing in Africa. Same thing in Southeast Asia. We're trying to do this with Australia. Trying to do this with Canada, and Mark Carney's just flat out saying no. If that's the case, then it's a very good thing for humanity in general. And then slowly but surely, we can get rid of that infrastructure, that non-state infrastructure I talked about earlier. We can get that power base minimized. We're not going to get rid of all of it, because there are evil people in the world and they have money. But we can minimize them, and we can get them, and we can put tabs on them. And then the United States itself can be the regional power it needs to be, which is to not have to be Pax Americana in terms of naval power around the world, but force the Chinese and the Russians and everybody else to help with the securing the global shipping lanes. And that's the big one. And that's probably another conversation for a different day. But that's kind of why China's access to Venezuela has to be cut off. Why China's access to Canadian oil needs to be cut off. It needs to be cut down to a proper size so that China can, patrol its sea lanes and we can patrol ours, and you only get so much heavy sour oil so that you're not sending missile cruisers over to secure the port of Los Angeles. Again, thinking strategically, thinking in terms of national security. So I'll turn the microphone back over.
Yeah, very fascinating analysis. I do want to end by pulling on the thread regarding the collapse of the EU bond market. What signs are you seeing there that leads you to believe that could be a possibility? Is this something that can be averted, or do you think it's inevitable in your view?
I think it needs to happen. I think the Europeans decided that that's how they were going to get out from underneath their current debt burden, right? That they were going to do what they always do, which is start World War III, cancel all the old debt, reissue their currencies, reissue consoles, and, right? That's what they did. That's what they've done previously. Trump is saying nuts today. He's saying, if you want to do that, that's fine, but you're going to be international pariahs, right? That's why they tried to seize the Russian foreign exchange reserves. That's why they're playing all these games. What we're seeing, watch bond spreads very carefully. What I've noticed is that the Italian 10-year is vastly outperforming the other two bond markets of the other two legs of the European Union's tripod of power, right? So Italy, Germany, and France. If you look at Italian 10 years versus French 10 years and German 10 years, you'll see that since the Biden-Trump debate of June of last year, that those spreads have been dropping, meaning the Italian debt has always been the highest yielding debt. It's now dropping. It has flipped French debt. trading at about 8 basis points higher than lower than French debt, and it's within 62 or 63 basis points down from 162 or even 200 basis points under German debt. So German bonds are being sold preferentially versus Italian debt being bought. And then all of that is being managed by the ECB versus US debt. And this is what I've been talking about for a long time now. You got to watch that whole complex. If you watch that whole complex together, or you can just tune in every Wednesday and Sunday because I cover all this every twice a week for my patrons, because this is this is literally my life at this point. That I think that's the thing you need to start looking at. And then what I've noticed now with the euro finally starting to roll over, I think they're starting to show the cracks where they need to sell US treasuries and they need to allow the euro to fall, and they need to sell in large enough quantities to force the euro to fall, to offset the tariffs, to offset, to offset all of this, all of Trump's weak dollar, strong gold policies. And they need to weaken and that's going to happen in the face of slightly rising oil prices. I think oil is going to go back into the low 70s. But then now you've got Europe between a rock and a hard place. You want to raise oil prices by 7 to 10%. And natural gas prices by however far they're going to go. But at the same time, they have to weaken their currency in order to protect their bond markets. So it's the exact opposite of the Chinese finger trap that Trump had them in last summer, where he had a weak dollar, high interest rates, keeping the euro dollar markets tight all summer, which is how he got the trade deals that he got. Now he's going to reverse. Now that you convert, now I'm going to say Trump's doing it. I think Besant's doing this, honestly, reversing that trade, forcing them to now weaken the euro to defend bond markets, to defend bond yields as the U.S. continues to cut rates. The Japanese, unwind the yen carry trade by normalizing rates with the U.S., which is something I also think is coming for by the end of 2026. I expect, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think that we're going to see the United States and Japan's interest rates converge within 25 to 50 basis points of each other. Makes sense. I mean, I can see the Japanese at 1.5 to 2%. I can see the United States at 2%. By the end of the year, right? I mean, why not? If we're growing at 6%, we can afford 2%. Especially if we can, because we're growing like 5%. GDP is growing at 5.5%. It's insane. Even if it's not government spending. Government spending is down. Right? So, I mean, something clearly is happening here that's different. And as long as wage growth and inflation are below, 2% in that respect. Wage growth is above 2%, and inflation, true inflation, is running under 2% in the United States. We can afford to cut. So Powell's going to continue cutting until he leaves the stage. The Ueda at the Bank of Japan is going to continue to raise. And in all of these things, Europe is the one that's in the target of all of those things. Because the way they liquefied their Eurodollar system for all these years was to turn Japan into the ultimate carry currency. And now that policy is in the process of ending. Got about another 18 months. And so that the Europeans either have to play ball or blow up the world, or I don't know, but they can do whatever they want. But it ain't going to be long term. Not with Trump fortifying the countries I talked about previously, pulling us out of all of those NGOs, those 66 international organizations, including the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. Where's that money going to go? All these think tanks, all that slop on the back of the U.S. taxpayer is going to go away. And you Katie bar the door if you get the American taxpayer paying 1/2 of what they're currently paying for the same level of government, the same level of effective government, not the same level of fraud plus effective government. We have, I'll be happy to pay half for the ridiculously horrible government I currently have. I just don't want to pay as much as I am. Then we'll fix the horribleness of our government, right? So stages. First, let's get rid of the fraud. Then let's get, what I mean? And then, order of operations, folks. And let's get the costs down so that we can live better lives. Then we can fix the horrible, get back to a more constitutional government. And then we can move on to a real golden age for humanity. It would be fun. It would be nice. I'd like to leave. That's the way I want to leave the planet. By the time I'm out of here, my time is on this planet is done and my body is finally worn out. That's my goal. I want to be able to walk off the scene going, yep, we fucking did it. And you can thank America, for it. It only took us 265 or 270 years to get it done. I'd like to leave that legacy for the rest of the world. I don't know about anybody else. So if you want to know what drives me, folks, it's that, I may be, and whatever I'm wrong about, I'm wrong about. And we'll fine tune it as we go along. So.
Well, on that note, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Tom. Tell us about the Gold, Goats, and Guns blog and podcast, as well as your Patreon.
Sure. You can find the blog over tomluongo.me or goldgoatsandguns.com. That's where I publish the, links to if you want to sign up for the newsletter, as well as all the episodes of the podcast, which comes out infrequently, but whenever the spirit moves. As well as you can sign up for the Patreon where we publish the monthly newsletter. It's a retail investor focused newsletter with unique commentary from both myself and Dexter White every month, as well as the twice weekly market reports where I go over all of the stuff that I talk about and keep you abreast of what's happening on a twice weekly basis, trying to distill the essence of what's happening on a week, on every Wednesday and every Sunday, tie it all to the capital markets. And then manage a pretty active community forum, and which I think is kind of the heart of. I think those two things are really the heart of the whole thing, and that's what we do.
Great. Well, I'll put all those links in the description below. Thank you so much, Tom. We'll get you and Martin together at some point to do a part 2 of that panel, so I'm looking forward to that.
That would be fun. It'll be fun to get to meet. To catch up with Marty. Haven't had a chance to do so in a while. So thank you, Jesse. Have a great weekend.